Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for having a conversation with me today. Where are you phoning in from?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a pleasure. I am based in Camden, beautiful part of the world in New South Wales.
What's your coffee order?
My coffee order, if you could have it delivered swiftly, please, would be an almond latte.
Amazing. And a book that has caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life.
Yeah, I've thought about this lots of times because people talk about, what's the next best book? Mine is a few years old now. It's probably getting close to a decade old, but I still reflect back on Daniel Pink's book, Drive.
Amazing.
Are you familiar with it?
I am. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that book. I think it's a deep well written simply. It's very profound. And I think it's still talking.
Yeah. I've actually, it's interesting you mentioned him. I got an email last week and he's coming on for a conversation, which should be really interesting.
Awesome.
And I think it was one of those, I've got a collection of books and that is in that collection of books that it really does change the way that you approach things. I mean, what is it that stood out to you about that book, about Drive?
I think for me, it kind of shone a light on some of the things that we sort of feel that we know, but we don't necessarily have the language to wrap around it until we hear the language.
Interesting.
And that was the experience for me when I listened to him talk about this juxtaposition of the internal motivators versus the external motivators, and just paralleling that to the fact that we do live in a lot of systems that started out with good motives, but actually are breaking down and not serving us that well anymore. And I love the way he just explained that whole idea of you can't necessarily get the best out of a person just because you give them a 5 or a 10% salary bump. Maybe you do, but it's not automatically correlated. And it really was a great book for me to enjoy another person talking about this idea that there's so much more to what motivates us and where we gain our reward from, the idea of mission and purpose and doing work that leaves an impact and existing in a healthy team that respects each other, all these other internal motivators. And I just loved it.
Fantastic. And something that you've changed your mind about. It could be within your area of expertise or it could be more broadly.
Yeah, great question. Look, this one's quite nuanced. I would say this has been emerging for me over the past few years. I went through a major career change at the end of 2021. I'd spent nearly 25 years in senior management roles in not-for-profits. And some of that was ministry, church-based roles. Some of it was to do with private schooling, community services, et cetera, et cetera. And so people who end up in that kind of role tend to be values-based, reasonably altruistic, try to see the best in people, et cetera, et cetera. But what you don't notice happening, I think, is how the way that you position yourself, by default, you can automatically superimpose that same value set on others and expect it from them. And so as I went through this career change, moving out of that industry, if you like, at the end of 2021, I realized that I still had some legacy default thought patterns. One of them was this idea of hoping and expecting that people would see me for who I actually am so that I could help them. And so what I had to start severing ties with was this notion of, Andrew, they are going to see who you are, they're going to see how capable you are, and then they're going to invite you to help them.
Interesting.
And I realized I had this hangover from not-for-profit world of needing to be in the helper mode all the time.
Yeah, wow.
And so I just made a conscious shift and said, look, people are going to see me the way they're going to see me.
Yeah.
And if that means I end up being useful and purposeful to them, great. If not, great. And so I stopped that thought process to the point where it's nearly dead now. And I just let it be where it is.
Interesting. And what did you learn about yourself during that period of change? I'm not someone, for example, who loves change. I'm getting better at it. But what did that teach you about yourself during that time?
During the career change specifically? A lot of things, actually. And some of them are still unfolding. I learned how ingrained we become, even when we think we're not.
Great point.
Or deeply entrenched in our ways of seeing the world and our paradigms and our lenses. I think that probably was the biggest one, is because I've been a person who is quite comfortable with change and I don't mind being challenged by difficult situations. But I made that change when I was 47 and I realized that even I was not immune to this idea that stuff had gotten in me and thinking and ways and routines and patterns that actually, even though my willpower was fully engaged with making the pivot, there were other portions of my soul that were not actually ready to move that quickly.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And that fascinated me because I thought I would be more ready for swift change than I actually ended up being.
That's so interesting, Andrew. And I think it's very easy to sort of look at other people and not reflect on yourself. And I think that's so incredibly reflective. I mean, I've had the privilege of hearing you speak a number of times, and the last time I heard you speak was at a seminar at our local church, and it was really wonderful to hear just how reflective you were and how vulnerable. I mean, I asked you quite a wouldn't say personal question, but quite a raw question. And it was just so lovely to see your vulnerability and your ability to reflect on that. I mean, has that always been something that you've been good at? Are you sort of naturally a reflective person, or is it a skill that you have developed as you've matured?
It's a little bit of both. I think it wasn't until my late 30s, where I was deep in the prime of my career at that time, I became aware how naturally self-aware I was.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So I think, we all do this. The things that we're good at or strong at, we don't necessarily view it as being that big a deal because to us it's natural. We don't think about it until somebody reflects back to us and says, you're so skillful or so, creative. And we go, am I? We think, oh, doesn't everyone just do that? And so I became aware that I was very self-aware and I am a reflective person, and I'm fascinated by the internal machinations of what goes on in our emotions, our thoughts, our motives, our will. I love the arena of behavioral science. I think there's so much to learn from it. And I've been an advocate for a long time, and even more so now in an age where people feel quite threatened by the advance of AI and various things. I've been a huge advocate for this idea that self-awareness as a muscle might just be one of the most important skills to grow in, because if you can understand you and why you do what you do, and not at a surface level, at a deep motivational level. Why do I do what I do the way I do it, when I do it? If you can learn to coach yourself in that, it changes massively how you interact with other relationships and people, because you suddenly become hyper aware of what could be driving other people's motivators and how to best complement with them. It's a transformative change. And so I do love that whole arena. And I guess when I'm in a communication mode, I do like to try and prototype it deliberately, because I think people have got no end of data and information that they can search. But I think the thing that really changes us is story and lessons applied in context.
And Andrew, before we delve into some of your career highlights, I'd be really interested to find out how being a parent has changed you. Because my children are significantly younger than yours. A bit of parenting advice, if you don't mind. How has it changed you? And what are you like as a dad to school-age children after working in the system for so long and now looking from the outside?
Yeah, interesting. A great question. I have a 19-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, and I have had, as you could probably imagine, maybe thousands of conversations about parenting with parents of all aged children and soon to be parents and so forth. I think the dominant thing that has come through in those conversations and in my own world personally is that nothing will ever supersede the application of time and presence.
Love that.
At the end of the day, whatever postcode you live in, whatever your salary package looks like, whatever's on your resume, none of those things are going to diminish the fact that what children want and need the most is us. You could have the best Christmas tree in the street or the worst, and it will not be a surviving memory into their adulthood where they were on that ranking list. What will matter is, did dad or mum show up when they could at my sport, at my school events? Were they in my corner? And I think for me as a dad, parenting changed me massively. I think it helped to bring out the best of who I am and who I'm meant to be. And I've loved the opportunity to apply some simple truths consistently. My wife and I both grew up in families and in homes that were not particularly affectionate with either physical touch or affirming words. And we made a commitment very early before we had children that we would change that we would break that circuit. And so I've taken great delight as a parent in being an active circuit breaker, that what existed in my family tree in the past does not have to carry forward into this generation. And so very simple things like we made an agreement that our children will hear the words, I love you, constantly.
Yeah.
And, around our house, that language is as normal as what's for dinner. It's just been embedded in who we are. And just being that voice of encouragement to my son, to tell him you've got what it takes, to my daughter to say you are enough as you are. For me, I think the best advice I could give is to just capture those little consistent things that are going to create the stability and the security around your children that's going to help them to navigate a really challenging time in history with social media and technology and pressures and fears about the future. I think a parent has this incredible privilege of being the stabilizing factor. And I still hold to a maxim that I was advocating for 30 years ago, that parenting is simultaneously the toughest and most important job on the planet.
I love that. I decided the same thing as well. I say to my guys every day, I love you. You are the most beautiful, the most treasured thing in the world. And I think there's power in that. I mean, my
Massive.
wife, phenomenally good at what she does, and I've learned so much from her. But I don't want there to be one moment that my kids even wonder if I love you is true. And so I think it's really wonderful. And thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing around some of those more personal questions. I really do appreciate it.
Of course, pleasure.
I'd love now to pivot slightly to talk about, tell me a little bit about your career journey and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. I'll give you a few bullet points. Coming out of high school, I was convinced and deeply motivated that my career would be wearing a baggy green for Australia.
I think we all want that.
And was tracking sort of in that direction and making my way to sort of the upper end of Sydney grade cricket here in Sydney. And then I had a huge fork in the road moment where essentially I moved away from that path and moved into essentially a mentorship opportunity with high school students. And I actually joined the staff of a church that I belong to in running all of the youth programs.
Right.
And ended up spending 10 years in that role.
Gosh.
Prior to that, I had actually done, out of high school, I had actually done a year of primary teaching at UWS at Milperra.
Come on, that's where I trained.
Okay, yeah. And I had walked around the room singing a Pizza Hut, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and a Pizza Hut, and thinking to myself, what in the world am I doing here? Because at that time, I had no intention of going into teaching, but it was the bridge to transfer into the studies that I wanted to do,
right?
Which I ended up doing, which was a degree in sports psychology and management. Then came out of that, never actually used that qualification directly, but went into this other path of running youth programs, became more deeply invested in that. And then over time, added various simultaneous roles in operations areas, in team leadership areas, and eventually became the senior leader / CEO, if you like, of that group of churches that I belong to. We also had a private Christian school that was part of that network. And I joined both of those boards in the early 2000s and then became the chair of the board of the church company as well as the school company in 2009. And I served in those board roles for 13 years.
Right.
And then at the end of 2021, by my own choice and design, crafted a succession plan to basically make myself obsolete. I felt like the time was right to change the chapter for myself and for those organizations. And so I master planned a very detailed succession plan in all of those arenas. And at the end of 2021, that whole handover process was complete. Since that time, I've been building various businesses, some of them in the consulting and management space, which I'm sure we'll touch on today, as well as a few other bits and pieces.
What did you learn about systems leadership during that time?
Yeah, interesting. I attended a conference recently where this was the main session, systems theory, and it was a great session and great content. I have found that systems leadership has got I won't say everything, but close to everything to do with square pegs in square holes. And for me, the primary focus is always the personnel. My experience has been generally that if you can get the right person with the right fit in the right role, a lot of the rest of the theories actually slot quite naturally into place, and you don't need to do too much engineering of systems and protocols, despite the fact that they have their importance and their role to play. But my discovery would be that your rate of return or your rate of improvement in either productivity or performance-based results or, cultural survey, cultural engineering, whatever it is you're trying to improve in organizationally, your rate of return is minimal if you try to push the system first before you spend the time trying to get the personnel selections right.
It's interesting.
Whereas if you can put personnel as primary and systems as secondary, and that was deliberate alliteration, primary first, secondary second, with personnel, then the systems, I think your rate of return actually goes up exponentially, because you have the opportunity then to unlock what we touched on a few moments ago around this idea of the internal motivators. There are certain personality types and skill sets that are wrong for certain positions and vice versa. And my experience has been that if you can get more of those decisions right than you get wrong, you actually can hang all kinds of systematic approaches on that correct team placement. And so I found that to be the case, particularly because, as you know, we both know, not-for-profits, schools, whether they be public or private, church-based organizations, community services, these spaces that we've existed in, they're extremely nuanced. They're very, very complex. People in leadership positions tend to find themselves being required to be expert in at least a dozen deep dives, which is not commonplace in the rest of society. And also alongside that, you're also trying to become expert in volunteer management.
Yeah.
So
it's huge.
You're dealing with all these moving pieces and variables that for me became an advantage. The context I was in was too complex to be able to just recline on a system or a model that worked elsewhere. And so I had to apply some trial and error, some very, very detailed observation, and probably a huge learning that was derived from that was a system being implemented without first giving due diligence to the personnel review. And I don't just mean quality of candidate. That's a no-brainer. I'm talking about candidate placement. Getting that right magnifies whatever systems you then seek to implement thereafter.
So important. And tell me about that. Like, what's your experience with that hiring process? Like, are you just looking at resumes and accomplishments and letters after people's names or before people's names? Or is there a deeper conversation around characteristics and personalities? I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Obviously, I can only speak from my own experience and my own approach. But again, going back to that previous comment around the self-awareness piece, for a person who is the hiring individual or the approving individual or a member of a committee, etc., to me, it's organizationally risky to allow that process to be overseen by people who are not self-aware. Because if they themselves are not self-aware and understand how they tick, how on earth will they get a read on another individual? Now, should we pay attention to resumes? Of course. Should we pay attention to references and getting on the phone and calling these people and asking smart questions? I've taken hundreds of phone calls over the years because I've been a referee for other people. And I've been amazed at some of the lack of thought in the questioning because people are about to make a really important hiring decision, which if they get right is going to benefit their business or their organization. If they get it wrong, they're going to waste time. They're going to waste money. They're going to waste time and money researching and rehiring and retraining again. And yet when they ring the referee, they'll say things like, how well do you know the applicant? Do you think they were a good employee? And I don't say this to them, but I think to myself, guys, come on. I'm giving you 15 to 20 minutes, precious minutes of my day here to help this friend or this former employee. And you've had time to prep for this phone call and you want to ask me, do I think they were a good employee? That's like asking Wayne Bennett a question at at a press conference in the NRL, he's not going to give you anything that you don't actually do your own legwork for. And I was always looking for chances to unpack the detail. So resumes, yes. Phone calls, yes. But I think the biggest part, Matt, is actually whoever is making the decision, do they have wisdom, discernment, intuition? Can they read the room well to watch body language, tone modulation in responses, avoidance of certain questions, enjoyment of certain questions? It's such a nuanced process that if you understand those muscles, so to speak, you're going to get more decisions right than you're going to get wrong. And it's huge, especially the further we go up the leadership totem pole. You have to get those right. Like in a school, if you hire a new principal, and I'm thinking, I obviously won't name the school, but I'm thinking of a school that I knew of in the past that spent $150,000 in the search for a replacement. That's the search. That's not the salary when they put this new person in. Anyway, they went through this search process and discovered 3 months in that the decision was horribly wrong. Payouts, wasted time, legal argy-bargy, only to come back to point zero again and start the search all over.
Yeah.
It's a huge area.
There's so much in that. I mean, I have had the privilege of sitting on multiple panels and leading multiple panels and participating and all of that stuff. And I think I think these are really important questions and really important conversations, the people, and especially when it comes to the people we put in front of young people. I think that is an incredibly important role. I mean, we all know people that can perform well in a resume and poorly in an interview, or poorly on a resume and great in an interview. And I think your reflections on some of those questions are hugely important. What's a really great interview question that you've been asked, and why was it one that you went, that is exactly the types of questions we should be asking for our schools?
One of the things I like to do is I like to ask people questions that have got nothing to do with the role.
Love that.
Yeah. Things like, tell me about your family.
I love it.
Where did you grow up? And what did you love about where you grew up? Or a line of questioning like, where do you see the world going? Do you think we've got a fearful future? What do you like about our country? I want to tap into the person. Because if I can unlock who the person is, I can discover most of what I need to know about whether they can fit that role. Because if I'm coming in there as the chief interviewer, or even as the person responsible to make the final call, I don't need the candidate to educate me on what the role necessitates. That's my job.
Yeah.
What I need to figure out is, who is this sitting in front of me? Okay, I can read their resume before they get there. I can make phone calls to their referees after they've gone. When they sit in front of me, I need to know, who is this person really? Because what I want to do is I want to ask the follow-up question and the follow-up to that follow-up, because I want to peel a lid off something. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be family-based, could be their upbringing, could be their previous industry. I've got to peel the lid off something, because once that lid comes off, people naturally start to leak the truth of who they really are. And that's when we start to make some observations, or we have the opportunity to go, okay, I loved what I just heard, or I'm a little bit concerned about the way they phrased that response. But if we just ask employment role-oriented questions only, I think we're missing a huge opportunity.
Why does it matter what people's lives are like outside of a role or outside of employment? I mean, why is asking about family so important? I completely agree. I think it is a great question, but what is it that you're hoping to understand with those questions?
Yeah, well, I want to understand, like I said, I do want to understand who they are, because that's going to guide me. That's going to help me. Yeah. But on a more macro level, it's coming from this simple understanding of whoever we hire in this moment, they are bringing everything of who they are into this team.
Yeah.
Now, some people like to believe that it's a two-dimensional thing of no, they just bring their productivity and their skill set. In my view, that is a dangerous and nonsense-based approach. When people come into our work environments or our family home or our sports clubs or our peer groups, they bring all of who they are. And that means their history. That means their current tense. That means their own hopes and goals for the future. They bring their value set. They bring their scar tissue from previous experiences. They bring the whole mixed bag of who they are. And as a decision maker, I need to ascertain, is there good dovetailing of this package of a person with the rest of who's already here? Because I've got to have a responsibility for those who are already here. I remember making an anti-hire many years ago where I had to remove a person from a role, not because they weren't predominantly competent. They were predominantly competent, but there were some things going on around their personal life that was making it extremely burdensome on the rest of the team to work with them. And so I had to create a very, very complex and quite difficult context to help a person vacate a role for their benefit so that I could help them in a different situation and do it to protect what we had already built with the rest of the team.
Gosh, that's a hard.
Well, after that unfolded, I had no less than a half a dozen other team members who came to me almost in tears, thanking me for doing that. And I know what they were actually saying is they were saying, you cared about our safety enough to make a difficult call. So as leaders, as decision makers, when we hire and even when we fire, we must believe by default in this idea that people bring all of who they are when they come to work for us, even down to simple stuff like, what does this person do when something doesn't go their way? Do they become a nasty person? Do they become manipulative and controlling and a troublemaker? We've got to search for those little things in people because it'll have a dramatic effect on our culture.
I think that's so important. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and it was exactly around that. Like, you really do see people's true character when decisions get made that they don't agree with, or when something happens that's unexpected. And I think it's hugely important. I mean, Andrew, how do we kind of balance that support and challenge when we're developing people? Because there's two sides to this, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It's a tenuous moment most of the time. What I have found that has worked for me is people need to believe that we are invested in them and not just their return. Now, that takes a time continuum. You can't prove that between Monday and Friday. That takes months and years. But then, therefore, because of that, it also takes true dedication from those who are leading. Coming back again to my earlier comment around getting personnel appointments right the further we go up the leadership chain, so crucial. We don't want to be putting people into any level of leadership role if they don't demonstrate to us that they have a genuine passion and commitment for developing others for others' benefit. If we can locate those kinds of people, we're on a massive winner, because all of us, and I'm the same, I'm sure you're the same, we want to be led, if we can, by people who actually care about us doing well and not just our productivity return to the organization. So that takes time to establish, and it takes going outside the lines, and this is permission-based, of course, but going outside the lines of just the work context. You know, a great question for leaders in all industries, and it applies to education, is when was the last time you had a meal with your colleagues where it wasn't connected to personal development in a formal way?
It's a great question.
When did you go to the local pub? You know, we've all got families and we're busy and all the rest of it. But when was the last time you arranged a context for your team where you shocked everyone because you went through the whole night with no business agenda?
That's great.
You didn't have a single talking point that was work related unless someone else brought it up organically.
It's a great question.
So we've got to invest in the relationship side in order to create time and opportunity for others at their tempo to get convinced. Matt believes in me because he cares about me. If that exists as our foundation, then we get the opportunity to have development moments. If we try to have development moments before building relationship foundation, it's precarious at best. Yeah.
Andrew, I'd love to get your thoughts on how we engage in challenging conversations, because one of my challenges many years ago when I moved from a classroom teacher position to a school executive position was my willingness to have these conversations. I think I would much prefer avoid them. But what I've learned from that process is that issues don't go away. They just compound and then reappear at a really inconvenient time down the track. Yes. So what's your experience been on how do we have these honest and frank conversations? And what do we do if things are not going to plan?
Yeah, 100%. It's a great question. It's a vital question in any expression of team life, especially for leaders. And there's a number of bullet points we can list. One of them we just touched on is this idea, leaders should take audit of their own motives. Are they actually invested in the success of others in their team?
Right.
Or is that a faux position they've adopted because they think it will further their own ladder opportunities?
Right.
So that's a real deep search of motives.
Yeah.
And if you can answer yes, I care about others winning, well, you've got a huge head start right there. Secondly, I would say practice. You've got to practice these conversations. You've got to be willing to be bad at them before you can get good at them.
I think that's great.
Thirdly, I'd say accept that you're in the majority. The large majority of people do not enjoy these conversations. They're not easy. They're difficult, but you can get better at them. That's the point. If you start with the relationship foundation that is honest and true, and you practice, and then you move into a consistency with it, you actually can get better. And I went through all of that in my early leadership years, is just this healthy acceptance of, don't feel comfortable having these difficult conversations, but I know that I'm going to have them. So generally, swifter is better if you're prepared. Swifter is better if your emotions are not running hot, but you also need frameworks as well. Sure. So here's a practical framework that I still apply today. I mean, I'm 51. I started using this framework when I was about 23. It's very, very basic, but it works. I call it a triple A approach. And what that means is I try to bookend all difficult conversations with 2 doses of affirmation. And adjustment lives in the middle. Affirm, adjust, affirm. So if I'm sitting with you and we were in the same context, I would find something truthful and specific and real that I can affirm you on.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be fluff, because fluff is flattery. I wouldn't sit with you and go, hey, Matt, you're doing a great job. Thanks for taking the time. Look, there's this one really bad thing you did. Okay, it's already cooked. It's already bad.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit down and think properly and go, hey, Matt, thanks for taking the time. By the way, before we get into the other content I want to talk about, I just want to let you know, I so appreciate the way you always spend that extra 10 minutes with the parents at the school gate. I know you're busy. I know you've got 1,000 things you probably need to get to in your day, but I've seen your consistency with that. That is huge for our school culture, and I really value it. Okay, so when that's specific like that and it's true, now it's encouragement, not flattery. That's what I mean when I say affirmation. Then I can go to adjustment, say, now listen, what I'd love to do is I'd love for you to hear my heart on an area where I believe you can be even better.
I love that.
So I invite you into a conversation that actually is about growth. It's not me camouflaging it with weak rhetoric around growth so that really I can actually smack you. Again, if I'm invested in you, I actually want you to grow. So I can couch it in that. And then I'm going to end that conversation after you've had the chance to ask questions and be on page with me and feel settled with it. I'm going to take whatever time it needs. If Matt's good after 15 minutes, then we're good. If Matt needs 2 hours for this, I'm going to take the time.
That's great.
Because I don't want to lose him. Can't afford to risk the relationship. But at the back end, I'm going to have something else ready, even if it's just to say, listen, I want you to know, and this is from my heart, I really appreciate the way you've actually engaged with this conversation. I know it's not easy for either of us, but I can see that you've actually leaned in with honesty here, and it matters, and I appreciate it.
That's such a great point, and it's so affirming, and I love how. And one of the things that marriage has taught me many things, is that my wife is like, don't just give me vague feedback. Like, don't just say you,
right.
Like, I appreciate you. Like, give me something specific. What is it that I'm doing, or what is it that we're doing that you are appreciative of? And I think that real timely and specific feedback is hugely important. And Andrew, I'd love to get your thoughts on how do we work with and how do we engage with a boss that we disagree with? Because my boss, my current principal, is absolutely phenomenal. She's one of those once in a lifetime school leaders. I'm so privileged to get to work with her, but it hasn't always been the case. What are some of the things we should do if we disagree with a boss, and what are some that we definitely should not be doing?
Yeah, great. A great question. I would encourage a person in that situation to actually start with themselves.
Great.
Now, it's probably inevitable that if you live long enough, you're going to bump into a colleague or a supervisor or a big boss that you either don't like or don't get along with or disagree with their approach. It's more likely than not. So how do we prepare in advance for the likelihood that that happens in the future, as opposed to just trying to figure it out in the moment?
That's right.
So here is that approach. That approach to me would be start with you. And what I mean practically by that is when you have this moment or this season where you become aware this is getting a little bit friction based, something's not working. Yeah. When you have that observation, start with you and say, what specifically is bothering me? And if necessary, dependent on your personality, write it down. Don't go share it. Don't go canvassing others for it. Start with you. What is bothering me here? Is it their wording? Is it their decisions? Is it their tone? Here's a really self-aware question that would help the brave people listening to this conversation. Is this person actually rubbing me the wrong way because they're touching scar tissue that I've got from a previous relationship in my life?
That's a great question.
So start with you. What is it that's bothering me? Second question, why is that bothering me? And the third question, I mean, I could spend time on each of these, but I would start with what? Try and get your own descriptor. Because if you're loose and lazy with it and you go, oh, yeah, I really don't like the new principal. Okay.
All right.
And maybe half the school parents don't like them either, but that doesn't help you. You can't live there. What specifically is troubling you? Then once you've identified that, say to yourself, well, is it because there's a clash of values going on here? Are we at odds in our values? Is it a tonal thing? Try to unpack a little bit why, and then get to the third question, which is how. And that is, how important is this in the grand scheme of life?
It's a great question.
So that will help you as well, because, let's get a couple of hypotheticals. What if there's a classroom teacher who's got a few little bullet points where there's a clash in pedagogy? Okay. Is it really the end of your world as a classroom teacher, or are you big enough and capable enough of actually getting on with it and going, you know what, I don't have to let that bother me overly if I remind myself that I'm a powerful human with agency. I do not have to be a prisoner to my reactions about how this other person deploys their methodology in this school. Or are we dealing with something more serious? Have you observed something that really, really is an affront to your values and your beliefs? Okay, well, if that's the case, I would say to you, the first thing is go slow.
That's right.
Because what we all do, and I do it, is we see a differentiation in values and beliefs, especially in today's world where social media algorithms have taught us to hate anyone who disagrees with us. We reactively quickly want to put that person into a box of, I will never be able to find a point of commonality with that person. Right. And it's actually not true. So I would go slow, even if the point of difference is serious. Just go slow cooker mode with it, because where you might end up is you might end up with a fundamental clash that requires you to change your employment. But why would you do that in a hurry? You'd be crazy to do that in a hurry. So go slow.
Yeah.
If it's something big.
Yeah.
If it's something that's quite small, then you can move fairly swiftly with it. But my big advice would be start with you and do the deep work on what and why and how. And if you're willing to answer all three of those in full honesty, you probably then have enough hints and clues as to what's truly going on and what you ought to do about it. And the real obvious stuff on the what shouldn't we do, don't canvas, whatever you do. I mean,
I've seen that.
I could say that a million times and people are still going to go canvas. But what canvassing and surveying actually does, it puts a smear on your reputation.
So true.
Because people go, oh, I heard the little burr that was under that question, Hey, Matt, what do you think about our new principal? Do you get troubled by the way he says such and such? Okay.
Yeah.
If you're having that conversation with an intuitive person, they might give you poker face, but they've already realized you've got a problem here.
Yeah.
And you're scouring around the edges, trying to build, a little bit of advocacy for yourself in case it goes pear-shaped. Yeah. Worst thing you can do.
I see that happen, not in my school. Like I said, we have a wonderful school, but I've definitely seen that happen before. Float and try and find evidence for their particular opinion. And it's dangerous, and it completely impacts and affects your reputation. It's not a smart thing to be doing.
No, 100%. I'd like to double down on one little comment I made there. And again, hopefully at this point, some of your listeners don't choose to switch off, but the brave ones
Sure.
they
Yeah.
might discover something. My experience over 30 years is that a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, when people have these kinds of clashes, it's more to do with the inner life than the external context. And like I said before, it's usually, and again, it's not 100%, but it is usually to do with that person or that moment is actually hitting a raw nerve of something in the past of the individual.
Yeah.
If you do any kind of research on wound theory, and this can start even from a medical practitioner's perspective, and that is to understand that the quality of care given in the early days after a physical body suffers a wound will determine the length of the healing process and the quality of the healing process. And one of the indicators, my father-in-law in his latter days of his career was a wound care specialist, and I learned this from him. He taught me this idea that when a wound is healing well and in a healthy way, we start to find that there is an itchiness connected to the blood flow returning.
Fascinating.
But what happens when it doesn't heal well is every kind of stimulus on the wound reminds the local site of the wound of the infliction of the wound.
Wow.
So if we take that metaphor into our soul, you can see the obvious inference there. And most humans are the same. I'm the same. We get wounded by people and situations. And if we don't heal well, what happens is inevitably we bump into something similar and we feel similar feelings to the original wound. And if we're not willing to go on the journey that we need, we will broadcast it out and blame others for what we're feeling on the inside.
Gosh, I think that's an incredible analogy. Andrew, I do want to be respectful of your time, and I'm so grateful that you'd give me an hour of your time to have these conversations. I think they're so important. Tell me a little bit about the inner world of leaders. What are some of the things that you've noticed about leaders that are passionate and stay excited and motivated for the long run? Have you noticed any kind of trends, or what are these people doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. My observation there, Matt, will have been that leadership is, whatever industry it's in or context, is a difficult job. That's true. It's a difficult task. It's becoming more difficult because the world is changing, people are changing, contexts are changing, and leaders are being faced every day with more and more complicated challenges with seemingly less and less solutions. So it's a very difficult task. Put it into environments like not-for-profits or schools, places like this, it's hyper complex. So generally, these kinds of roles, they attract people who are values-based and altruistic. They are in it not to become millionaires. They're in it to leave a legacy, to make an impact. That they're purpose-driven, missional-based people. Now, that's a positive on one side. But the negative on the other side of the coin is a lot of these people, out of a good motive, but with a poor management plan, they drive themselves into the ground. So emotional burnout is a huge and increasing factor in the realms of leadership across many, many industries, but especially in the not-for-profit education world. And what I've discovered is that, generally speaking, most people, certainly most leaders, if they are not trained and mentored in the nuances of what soul tank management is all about, which is a framework that I love to use with people that I work with and coach and organizations and so forth. And the big metaphor for us here is the simplicity of looking at our own vehicles that we use for transport every day. We fuel them. At the moment, we try not to because it's scary to look at the Bowser and you see that number going up so fast. But to get from any point A to any point B, there must be fuel in the tank. And nobody driving a car or a motorbike or a truck or whatever gets angry at their car if they sit on the side of the road with a low fuel gauge, turn the engine off for 1 hour, turn the engine back on, and then get shocked that the fuel gauge hasn't gone any higher. We would call that lunacy.
That's true.
And yet we practice it in our inner world daily, weekly, monthly, year in, year out. And then we wonder why people hit the wall with an emotional burnout. Right. People hit the wall with emotional burnout, in my estimation, not largely because their plate is so full, although that is a factor. It's more to do with the fact that they are burning emotional resources in their soul without the commitment and the dedication to skilled, nuanced refueling. And they're trying to travel from their point A's to their point B's, which is January to December. It's also from start of term to end of term. It's also from Monday to Friday. It's also from Monday morning to Monday afternoon. They're trying to take these trips on a tank with a flashing orange light saying low fuel. They don't know that it's low. They don't know how to refuel, and they're not doing it consistently. In my view, it would be the biggest problem facing leaders in today's world. They don't know how to actually keep themselves sustainable.
Gosh.
And it's massive.
That's huge. Andrew, what are some of the things that you do personally to help maintain that tank? And is there, or are there any areas in your life that you feel that you are maybe underinvesting in somewhat and you'd like to refocus on?
Yeah, absolutely. Real quickly in bullet points, there are reasons why you put diesel fuel in a car with a diesel powered engine. It's because the engine has been designed to operate on a certain type of fuel. If we can appreciate that there is an individuality of soul tank management, we can understand that there are different types of fuels required. We also need a framework in our calendar. I've trained people for many, many years around this idea that we need roughly a 24-hour stop in every 7 to 10 day cycle. We need roughly a long weekend equivalent stop in every quarter, roughly. We need roughly a 2-week or a little bit more stop in every calendar year. And if they're not in our diary, we're not even being remotely serious about managing ourselves. But coming back to the fuel thing, you've got to figure out through trial and error and application what specific things fuel you, because it won't be the same for everybody. If you took 100 people and told them all, spend the first 2 hours of your Monday morning reading your favorite latest book and then journaling your reflections, probably 20 people will love it. 80 people will look at you cross-eyed like a confused Labrador. They go, what a waste of my time. Different souls need different fuels, and it's as individual as the fingerprints on our fingers. We have to do testing to figure out and prove a feedback loop of step 1, I planned an activity in my diary. Step 2, I went and did the activity in my diary. Step 3, I observed myself after the activity that I just finished. Is the tank now lower, higher, or the same?
That's great.
And the way we test the measurement on the fuel tank is we assess our willpower muscle for everyday mundane activities. If you don't have an increase in willpower for getting up to do your normal, boring routine, you probably haven't put enough fuel or the right type of fuel in the tank. Because if you can find your fuel and put it in regularly, you'll find that the willpower muscle is the gauge on your dashboard that tells you if you're fueling your soul or not.
Gosh. Wow. And it's so much. I mean, there's so many sort of common threads, I think, that have been throughout our conversation today. And I think one of the main ones is that self-reflection. So that ability to be able to go, okay, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling? What can I do now? I think that's amazing. And Andrew, an area that you feel like you would like to invest more into? You mentioned sport is quite important. Is it something that you're continuing to engage in regularly, or?
Yeah, it is. I've always had a very deep passion for sport, for as a spectator, as a participant, the theatre of competition, et cetera, et cetera. And I've done a lot of personal sporting expression and fitness and all the rest of it. Something that I want to invest more in, and I've just recently started, and it's been quite an interesting experience to observe with myself. Nearly all of my exposure to sport and fitness since I was a very young boy was tied to the opportunity to compete. I'm a bit overboard, to be honest, even at this age. I love the opportunity to be in a competitive sport environment, but something shifted in me in the second half of last year where I realized something that I couldn't previously do was starting to happen, and that was to simply go from a point A observation of data to a point B of action connected to discipline. Do this because you know it's the right thing for you. Right. So previously, I needed competition or I needed a motivating factor, whereas late last year, I joined a local gym and I did it specifically and deliberately This is very unlike me. It was totally and purely based around the research that I've read on the importance of resistance-based weight training for people as they get older.
Yeah.
And something in my brain clicked and just went, Andrew, you're in your 50s now. If you want to be healthy at 77, you've got to go push weight around.
Yeah.
And it was like someone turned a light on in a room.
Yeah.
I just agreed with myself instantly and went, okay, I'll go do it.
Love that.
And I was fascinated by it because previously I needed some other motivation like the competition, but I want to keep investing in that. I've told myself that I need to do that now for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. That 2, 3, 4 times a week, I just have to go do it if I want to live long.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I'm about 10 years younger than you, but I've recently had that revelation. I mean, the way that I train for longer distance races and runs has completely changed since when I was in the 20s. My wife reminds me that I should stop following 25 and 30-year-old marathon runners on Instagram because their times are significantly better than mine.
That's why you follow them.
That's right. But it is, I think there are definitely certain things that are no longer optional. And for me, that weight training and flexibility is definitely that. So it's lovely to hear that you're putting those things in place. That's really important. Andrew, final question, if you don't mind. If there was somebody listening to this conversation who was considering moving into a leadership role in a school, what advice would you give them?
There's a lot of things that we could draw on, right? If I could only say one thing to them, it would probably be take enough time to choose for yourself a mentor and commit to the relationship.
Brilliant.
I've got this. I certainly didn't invent this maxim, but I am a huge believer in it. And that is the idea of learning to ask who before we ask how.
Great.
It's not wrong to ask how. It's totally appropriate. But what we find often is that the path to a result is not only quicker, but it's more thorough and complete if we ask who before we ask how. We exist in a world where how is prevalent because we've got so much resource within reach with, Googling and ChatGPT and AI software and all this stuff that can help us so that we can be self-made men and women, which doesn't exist. That's a whole other podcast. But if we could learn the discipline of who has been where I'm trying to go, who has trod the path ahead of me, find that person, invite them to become a mentor, arrange the parameters of what that looks like for you, and then commit with dedication as a student of their learnings and their experiences, including their mistakes. I think a person going into leadership in school or any other context would be so well served to find themselves a mentor that's right.
Amazing. Andrew, how can people find out more about the amazing work that you do?
Probably as it pertains to what we've been talking about throughout this conversation today, the best place would be to visit my LinkedIn page where I post quotes and comments and articles and various things, and they can find out info about some of my training programs and resources that I offer there. That's probably the best place.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure I put all of that information in our show notes. But Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with me today. It has been incredible. And I've loved hearing some of your wisdom around some of these really complicated issues around leadership. So thank you for taking the time. And I can't wait to see what's next for you. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.